Blender 2.8 is finally out. It has a ton of exciting changes, such as a new graphical interface and new render engines, although some of these changes can make it a little bit confusing to switch from 2.79. So this video is going to be a guide to upgrading from 2.79 to 2.8. Let's get started with the major interface changes. The first major change is that now we got different tabs for different layouts. We had something similar in 2.79 where we got this drop-down window that could give us different tabs. But using it as tabs makes it a little bit easier to get to. It also now allows you to change from, as you can see, object mode to, if I change the sculpt tab, it now automatically changes to sculpt mode. Now this will be found under your tool options in workspace. You'll see the mode, sculpt mode. We can also filter some add-ons that we choose so we don't have to have all the add-ons enabled in every workspace. So I'll go here and I see under workspace it's in object mode. So that will choose the default mode for our workspace. The header has also been moved to the top. It now has floating icons so that you can see stuff behind it. We got in the left, we got the standard menus, the same that we had before. In the middle, we got the transform options, we got the pivot point options, the snapping, and the proportional editing options. To the right, we got some viewport settings. So as you can see, we got this, which is object types visibilities. So if I wanted to hide all meshes, I could click this, or I could click this and it'll make it so that I can't select the meshes anymore. We also got gizmos. So we got like our navigation gizmos here. We could click this and it'll turn off all the gizmos. We also got active tool gizmos. So if I choose the move tool, I can turn off active tools or all of it and it will hide that gizmo. We got overlays. The first important ones are like the guides and the grids. So like the axes. Then if I tab into edit mode, we got some more important ones. We got face orientation. So if I click this, you'll see that it turns blue. It would show red if one of my faces was backwards, or the normals are backwards. So I can know that I need to flip that face. We got measurements. So I could choose edge length. And if I selected this edge, you'll see that this edge is 2 meters long. And we got our normal options so that we can see the normals of our mesh. And then, of course, we got a bunch of other ones that you might want to know about. Next, we got X-ray mode, which allows it to be semi-transparent. So I could select this edge, even though I can't see it normally. It's behind everything else. So if I go into X-ray mode, I can select it. We also got our viewport render modes. The first one is wireframe, which has been a little bit improved. If you notice that this line up close to us seems a bit darker than the lines behind it, which are farther away, which makes it so that you can see what's going on with the wireframe a little bit better than you could previously. I can see the viewport shading options under here, and I could use color single, which would be all the colors would be the same for everything. I could change it to object, which would be based off of the object's color, or I could choose random, and it'll make everything a different color. So if I added icosphere here, well, you can see that it's a little bit of a different blue, I think. See if I can. Yeah, this cone is a much more obvious different blue. So that way, if you use random colors, you can tell different objects apart more easily. Then we got our solid render mode, which is similar. So we got our colors. We can change to random, the same. The texture base, material base, objects base, or vertex paint based. We got our themes, which could be based off the world or viewport. We got backface culling, which will make the backsides of faces invisible. So that's another method for seeing if something that you're editing is inside out. We got X-ray, which shows how strong the X-ray is, and it turns on the X-ray there. We got shadow, which affects the shadows of stuff. So if I duplicate this with shadow on, you can see it puts a shadow on the other cube. If I turn it off, there is no shadow on the other cube. We got cavity, which makes a little bit of a kind of highlight wherever there's a cavity. So you see On the edges, it's brighter. And if I maybe did this, beveled it, and maybe scale this. So if I turn it off, it's a little bit more noticeable where that cavity is. So that can make it a little easier to tell the shape of the model. The toolbar is now simplified to just icons, and if you grab it on the edge and you pull it out, it could be 2 rows of icons, or you could see the text. If I hold down one of these with where it has the little arrow, it will have some related options. So under scale, we also got scale cage. Now if I tab into edit mode, you'll see if I say choose the loop cut, you'll see that after I use it once, it's still open and still using this tool. Unlike before where it would just use the tool once like the shortcuts do. Now there's a few different places to get some options. So one is here in the properties panel under the first one, which is the tool options. We got number of cuts. I could raise this to say 5, and then if I click here, it'll add 5 cuts. Now I could also press N, and under tool, we'll get our tool options in this menu here too. So I could lower it back down to 1, and if I click, we get 1 cut. If I right click on the header and choose header, show tool settings, we'll get another place for it, which I like this place specifically for like if I'm in texture paint or sculpting mode. I think it's nice to have at the top. It kind of reminds me of like Photoshop's positioning and such. And then again, I could change it to say 10 here. Now we also, of course, have this, which is our previous tools options. So I can change it after the fact here, like what you could get with the menu that you got when you pressed F6 before. And now some of them, such as extrude, will give me this gizmo, so I can extrude, and it uses a little gizmo that stays there. Now we still have our standard keyboard-based tool options that we had before, so if I press E, it'll extrude just like it used to, just one time. And if I hit like something like Z or X or Shift X, you'll see that it still has the keyboard-based options for each of these tools. Now, most of these keyboard-based options for the tools also work when you're using the toolbar version of the tools, but a few of them don't. For instance, if I hit Control R to add loop cuts, and I can use a scroll wheel and it will add more or less based off of that. But if I were to go into the loop cut tool in the toolbar, using the scroll wheel just zooms in and out, and it doesn't affect the amount of cuts you make. The bar that pops up when you press N, which is this guy, now has different tabs with different categories, so it's a little more organized. And one thing is you'll notice that a lot of the add-ons that used to have their tools inside the toolbar are now here, such as loop tools, which is also in right click. And if I tab into object mode, I got bold tool here, and what other add-ons you might enable might pop up in the end menu instead of the toolbar. But some of them that just need icons will leave it in the toolbar. The specials menu when you pressed W has changed. It's now on right click, and it's now the context menu. So as you see, I'm in edge mode, so it's got specific options for edges and not just for the editing mode. So if I change to face mode, I have different options and vertex mode, I have different options. As you can see, the length of the menu was different. If I tab out of edit mode and right click, you'll see it's got some new options. For example, shade smooth, shade flat, and set origin would be the most important ones to keep in mind are there. The other ones you can use different shortcuts to get to, or don't really use all that often, I think. Now if you press Q, you get a quick favorites menu. So I can add anything to this menu. So if I right click on one of these tools, say the move tool, I could add it to quick favorites by pressing this. I hit Q, now I got move here. I could also add an option here by right clicking on one of these options, any of them, and add it to quick favorites. And as well, I could even add something like a modifier to quick favorites. So if I use the mirror modifier a lot, I could add that to the quick favorites and it will be there. And since we're talking about modifiers, they have been reworked I believe completely. So a lot of them have new options. So the mirror modifier now has got a few more options. Like I don't believe it had bisect before. And there's one new one that I know about called weighted normal, which is pretty useful. It looks horrible here, but basically it will change your normals to improve them. Where it works really nicely is if I say beveled this with the bevel modifier and had like a small bevel. It's kind of just one flat bevel with one edge, but then if I add a weighted normal modifier to it, it will give the illusion of a higher poly bevel. So that can work nicely for like game objects to make them look a little bit higher poly and give them the nice little tiny bevels that every object actually has. I have more on that modifier and other normal editing tools in this video that will pop up in the little eye thing. The layer system has been removed. It's been replaced with collections, which are in the outliner. You see a scene collection and a starting collection. They're kind of like folders in the outliner, and you can hide them, you can disable them completely, or you can collapse them to make them take up less space. You can have unlimited collections, and they're also nestable, so if I'm holding this, I can hit new collection, and it'll make more. I could also select an object and hit M, and it'll move to collection, so I could choose a collection, or even the nested collections here, or I could hit a new collection and make it a cube collection. Okay, and then you'll see cube collection, and this cube was moved to that. The outliner now has been simplified a little bit. You'll see that some of the toggle icons here have been removed, the selectable and the render. So if I go to this new filter option, you'll see the restriction toggles, and it only has the enable and the eye options enabled. I could add back this, and I could add back the disable and renders one, and you'll see that I got more options again. I could also choose to filter out certain types of things, like I could get rid of all the lights in the scene, or get rid of all the collections in the outliner. Not actually delete them, just not show them in the outliner. There are a few other small changes, but I think most of them you will be able to notice and figure out easily. Like there's a few small tweaks to the timeline. Now we can talk about shortcuts. So first of all, there's been a few changes to selection. Now left click is the way to select. Alt A is how you deselect things. Or if I double select A, it will. So basically, normally you'll use A to select everything and Alt A to deselect everything. But if you're like me and found it kind of hard to switch, you can go to Edit Preferences, and you can go to the key map, and you'll see select all toggles, and that'll keep it in the same behavior as 2.79. But pressing A will unselect everything if anything is selected, and press A will select everything if there's nothing selected. So you can just use the way you were used to before. You could also just click outside where there's nothing to deselect everything. That works well too. You can now select box with just clicking and dragging without hitting B. Either of those work now. You can lasso select with Control and hold right click. Since left click is now select, place 3D cursor has been changed, so it's now shift right click. Spacebar is now play the animation. So that's similar to like YouTube, or like your most video editors use space to play or pause. Since space isn't search anymore, they changed it to F3. So you can search for, I don't know, random maybe, select random. If I tab into edit mode, you'll see the vertex, edge, and face modes are here. If I press 1, 2, or 3, it'll switch between. So 3 to go face, 2 to go edge, and 1 to go vertex. There are now pie menus, which if I hold Z, for instance, I get the pie menu for the shading, viewport shading method. So I could go to rendered, or look dev, or wireframe, or solid. And basically just hold Z or whatever the keyboard option for that pie menu is, and then you hover in the direction and it'll select it, and then you let go, and now you're in wireframe. And if you just press Z and you don't hold it, I have to hover in the direction and then click down with left click to select it. So the quickest way is to just hold Z, go in the direction of it, and then let go. real quick. Control tab now gives you a pie menu with all of the options for editing modes such as edit, sculpt, object, etc. Alt Z now toggles X-ray mode, so this will look better if I'm in solid. Tilde, which is the little squiggly line that's usually above tab and next to 1 or top left corner of your keyboard. It will give you the view orientation, so I could go to top or bottom or whatever. And this is really good if you're using, say, a laptop keyboard where it doesn't have a numpad to use the normal numpad shortcuts for that. Maximize the editor is now control space, so I can maximize any editor that my mouse is hovering over. So if I want to sculpt with a big screen without having this stuff on the side, I can just hit control space. Control Shift Alt C for set origin was removed. This is why in edit mode you have to right click and use set origin to set the origin. Now I probably forgot an important change here, so let me know in the comments if you noticed something, and check the comments in case someone commented on something I missed. Finally, let's talk about the render engine changes. Now to switch to them, you have to go to the render tab in the properties, and now you can choose between them. I'll choose cycles. Now there's a few changes. If I go into render mode, you'll see that I can tab into edit mode, and I can actually maybe select one and edit now in cycles, which is nice. I can edit it in Eevee 2 in render mode and all that stuff, which is pretty nice if you have like lighting and stuff already set up. Cycles is also now noticeably faster, and you can render with both the CPU and GPU at the same time now. Although I think some of the tests I've seen have shown that it's not always actually faster than just the GPU. So maybe not, it'll be useful. Workbench render engine is the engine that's also using solid or wireframe shading, which is why it looks similar to solid. So if you go to solid, you'll see that the options here look the same as the options here because the render mode options are the same options. Now this is useful basically for if you don't have like any lighting set up, and if you want to render out, say, a work in progress to send to somebody, maybe you can hit F12 and it'll render out with the standard studio lighting or the matte cap lighting or flat shading. So if I press F12, you can get just a silhouette for that. So you can use that if you're like maybe trying to design a character and making them have an interesting silhouette. So those would be the main use cases for it. But there's one other one that I found that was really useful. So basically I had a 3D model of a branch I was making for a tree. Now I couldn't just place that branch around a tree for a video game because that would take too many polygons and it'll make the video game run too slow. So I need to turn that branch into just a flat plane with a texture on top of it that looks like that branch. So what I could do is I could go into like Eevee and then render the colors of the branch, and then I could go to matte cap, and then there's a check normal one here. So this checks the normals. So I could hit F12 and I could use what I get as a normal map for the plane. So I can combine that color one from Eevee and the normal map from Workbench to get depth into the branch material for the plane, and then it'll make it look a little bit less flat. I could also render maybe a clay model I'm sculpting with the clay matte cap. So those are the main uses for Workbench other than just in solid mode. Now the big one is Eevee. This is the big new one. It's a real-time render engine, which means that 1, it renders really fast in the viewport, and 2, it renders not quite real-time when you're rendering an animation, but a lot faster. So you could render a cartoon animation and make huge time savings. Now it's based off of video game render engines, and it usually looks good enough, but sometimes you will want to use cycles over it for certain things that need to be photorealistic or things that just don't work well in Eevee. Now, Eevee's options include ambient occlusion, which basically will add little shadows in little creased areas and crevices and such where the normal shadow making method of a video game engine doesn't actually get to. It only works for the bigger shadows. We got bloom, which will basically, what it does is it will make anything that is brighter than 100% brightness, it will make them glow by blurring it. So for example, I could take this light and if I made it really close to this, you'll see that it'll start to glow a bit because it has so much light reflecting off of it, so it glows. And of course I could change how strong it is, what the threshold for it is to reduce it. This also works great for if you have like an emissive material that you might put on a light bulb or something that's meant to glow. We got depth of field, which basically will have the camera focus on something specific, and then everything that's farther away or much closer to the camera than what it's trying to focus on will become blurry. You have more options for that in the camera settings. So I go to camera settings and you see depth of field options. We also got subsurface scattering, which simulates light passing through translucent objects like on an ear or like a leaf or something. You'll see that if you put a light near it, you'll see light coming through it and it'll kind of like glow on the other side of the light. You got screen space reflections, which creates reflections. Now what the screen space part means is that it will take the rendered frame and then it'll take the roughness information of everything to see if something is smooth enough to have reflections on it. And then it'll have an effect where it edits the rendered image, kind of like a Photoshop effect where it will take things in the rendered image and put them inside of that smooth surface for reflections. So this isn't perfectly accurate. What it means is that if something is not on the screen, it will not be put into the reflections. So let's say your camera is pointed at a mirror and you have something behind the camera. Now you'd expect the thing behind the camera to be shown in the mirror, but since it's behind the camera and it's not shown in the frame, it will not be put in the mirror based off this. Now you have another reflection option. If I hit Shift A, I got light probe and then reflection cube map and reflection plane, which is where it will bake the reflections into a texture image. Then it can use those to apply into the reflective surfaces. Now neither of these are very accurate, so this is one of the reasons why Cycles wins out in photorealistic situations where it's going to give you much better reflection results most of the time than Eevee will, because Eevee has to fake them, while Cycles uses path tracing to simulate light and make them real. We got motion blur, which if you animate something will create motion blur. We got volumetrics, which are pretty cool. So let's say I added a UV sphere. I'll turn this into my volumetric. So I'll go into shading tab, and then I'll add a new material. I'm going to get rid of this principled BSDF, and I'm going to hit Shift A to find a new one called principled volume. And what this does is if I plug into volume, it'll create this volume of like smoke or something. So let's say I make this real big and maybe make it less dense. So you got like a little bit of smoke through the whole scene. So if I say I went and added a spotlight, where is it? I can put it here. And if I maybe hid this light here and go into render mode, you'll see that the light has a bit of a volumetric light shaft effect coming from that point light, which is really cool. So I can make this point light maybe stronger to make the effect stronger. So that's really cool. I could turn off volumetric lighting and you'll see that the light doesn't have it. So it creates volumetric things like smoke and then like has light affect those things. So that's really cool. We got hair options, so you can change the type of hair from strand to strip. We got shadows, so I could make nicer shadows. Let's say if I put a mesh here and put one here, you'll see that currently it has hard shadows. I could change it to soft to make it blur out a little bit and be a little softer and nicer looking. Or I could change the size to make them much lower resolution shadows or higher, nicer resolution shadows. I think they're like that before. Or the cascade size. We got indirect lighting so that I can bake indirect lighting and bake the reflection cube maps. We got film, which has filter size, transparent, and overscan. So if I click transparent, it'll be transparent in the render. So you can have a transparent background. Got our color management options like filmic and such. And then we got simplify and freestyle. Now let's say I wanted to go into the shading tab to check out some of the new shading options. So we got principled BSDF, which is like the new super shader thing. It's got the base color, it's got whether it's metal or not, it's got whether it's rough or not, all those cool things. The normals for the normal map. So this creates a PBR realistic looking material, and it makes it so that you don't have to make huge node groups to create something like that. This works in both Cycles and Eevee. We got other new ones. We got bevel, which creates the illusion of a bevel using normals. So it doesn't actually add bevels to it like the bevel modifier, it just shades bevels on it. So I have to change the cycles for this to work. And then I could just add this bevel here to the normal. And you'll see there's a little bit of a blur or bevel kind of effect going on, but it doesn't show up in Eevee. We got our ambient occlusion node, which is another new one. So if I chose this as the base color, you'll see that this gets darker here, and I can use the ambient occlusion as like a mask for some textures or something. I could maybe have dirt going inside little crevices or something like that using it, which is really cool. You have to have ambient occlusion enabled though. You got the other principled options, like there's supposed to be principled hair here. I think it doesn't show up in every situation or something. Now let's say I wanted to make this semi-transparent. I could change the alpha on this, but I would need to change the setting to tell the shader that it's allowed to be semi-transparent. So I can go to the material, scroll down to the settings, or press N and go to options in the shader editor. And then you'll see I got some options here. So blend mode, I could change to alpha blend, and then it'll become semi-transparent. I also got alpha clip, which basically says that it's either invisible or it's not invisible. So this is good if you plug a texture into there for something like whether there's a leaf there or not a leaf there on a plane. We got backface culling, so if I have inverted faces where you can see the back face, it will be invisible. We got shadow mode, so I could change it from opaque, none, alpha clip, or alpha hash. You'll need to use alpha clip or alpha hashed for when you have a semi-transparent model with different levels of it, transparency. Got clip threshold for your alpha clip, so I could change it to say 0.44, and then it'll stay transparent up to 0.44, or I could reduce it and then it'll not be transparent anymore. We got screen space refractions if you want screen space refractions. We got subsurface translucency. If you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe, and check out some more of my videos for more Blender tutorials. Thank you. You got screen space. You got screen space refract. You got screen split. Now what screen space mean? Now what the screen.